Good evening. I'd like to thank you very much for coming here this evening. We have a very special guest. My name is Joe Geiger. I'm the Director of Archives and History, and this is one of our last lectures for the year in our Archives and History lecture series. We do have one more on Thursday, November 16th. Rail historian and author Tim Hensley will be here to present the Norfolk and Western Railroad, its Ohio Extension and Canova District. So that again will be Thursday, November 16th, Tim Hensley. So a real nice program to close the show for the year. We have a very special guest with us this evening. David Corbin has a PhD in labor history, and he taught labor history for the University of Maryland in Europe and at College Park, Maryland. He is the author of 2 books on West Virginia coal miners, and one of them is entitled Life, Work, and Rebellion in the Coal Fields, the Southern West Virginia Miners, 1880 to 1922. I've been teaching West Virginia history for about 20 years, and this book is one that before I teach the Mine Wars, I always go and read that book over again because it is such an important history of our state. So if you've not read that, it's a wonderful work. But he's not here to talk about that this evening. He also worked in the U.S. Senate for 26 years. 6 years on the leadership staff of Senate Majority Leader Robert C. Byrd, and 10 years on the leadership staffs of Senate Majority Leaders George Mitchell and Tom Daschle. He also served as Senator Byrd's speechwriter for the last 10 years of Byrd's career. He's the author of a book on Senator Byrd, The Last Great Senator. And I would note that Bill Clements from West Virginia Book Company is here with copies of the book. If you want to come up afterwards and purchase one, I'm sure the author would be glad to sign it for you. Robert C. Byrd's encounters with 11 U.S. presidents. And tonight he's going to speak about Senator Byrd, and his lecture, as you note here, is entitled The Myths and Realities of Senator Robert C. Byrd. We're absolutely delighted to have our speaker this evening. Would you please help me welcome David Corbin.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Thanks for inviting me here to speak tonight, and thanks especially to talk about one of my favorite topics, one of my 2 favorite topics, coal miners and Robert C. Byrd. You're going to have to bear with me at times tonight. Some of you know I've had serious health problems during the past year, so it might affect what I have to say tonight. I've gone from 21 prescriptions down to 12, and about 2/3 of the 12 say do not operate heavy machinery or drive. In other words, it causes drowsiness. So if I have mental lapses or doze off, it's the medication, it's not a senior moment. But bear with me at times though. But do thank you for inviting me here, especially to speak about Robert Byrd. So much I could talk about. I've narrowed it down at first to actually, I want to talk, for a man who's in a public figure for 60 years, there's so much misinformation out there about the person, and so much of it negative. It's just incredible, and it's just accepted and promoted by friends as well as by his opponents. I really want to address so many of them tonight, but I'm afraid I won't have the stamina and the energy to get through it. So I want to start in with the biggest misconception of his career, as well as the biggest controversy of his career. And it's his Senator Robert Byrd in race relations, in civil rights. It's far different than we've always been led to believe. The conventional wisdom of Robert Byrd, I'll try to get back a lot of the other myths and realities if we have time, if I have the energy to do it right now. Like I say, I want to address this issue because it's so important to me. And to him, to his legacy also. Byrd and civil rights. Given this background, he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Given that background, people just assume early in his career he's a racist and eventually modified his views. When he passed away, the NAACP did a eulogy on Senator Byrd. In it, they noted Senator Byrd reflected the transformative powers of this nation. He went from being an active member of the KKK to being a stalwart supporter of civil rights legislation. Ira Shapiro, a recent book, The Last Great Senate, which I did take off the last great Senate, he's talking about the 95th and 96th Congresses. Those were two Congresses where Byrd was his first term as the Senate Majority Leader. He titled Last Great Senate, and it came out about a year before my book did. So it's a perfect takeoff in Byrd's first two terms Senate Majority Leader. He talks about what an effective job Byrd did as the Senate Majority Leader. He does a great job there, but when it comes to talk about his personal background, not so good. He writes, Ira Shapiro writes, as a young man starting out in West Virginia politics, Byrd had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He had long ago resigned his membership, yet he remained vehemently opposed to advances in civil rights. Byrd conducted an all-night filibuster against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and opposed Voting Rights Act. He opposed Lyndon Johnson's 1967 nomination of Thurgood Marshall to be the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. He waged a harsh campaign against the District of Columbia's Home Rule government, which struck many observers as tinged with racism. Now that's Ira Shapiro, and Shapiro was, like I say, for the most part, very positive toward Byrd, at least the Senate leadership, but such a negative view of Byrd dealing with race. I will discuss Byrd's background with the Ku Klux Klan in a few minutes, but I want to discuss his overall record on civil rights first to get that straight. To show you Shapiro was just totally wrong on what he had to say. When Byrd came to the U.S. Senate in 1959, he comes to the Senate in 59, only 19 offices in the entire Congress were integrated. Now we're talking about the entire Congress, not the Senate. 534 offices, only 19 were integrated. Byrd was integrated. He had African-American staffers. He was one of the 19 that was integrated. Byrd, with patronage powers, desegregates the Capitol Hill Police Force. He appoints the first African-American to the Capitol Hill Police Force. He appointed the second African-American to the Capitol Hill Police Force. As chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on District of Columbia, he forced the Metropolitan Police Department to increase the number of African-American police officers. This is several years before affirmative action, and he's almost foreseen the problems between the African-American community and police officers today. He says it's ridiculous. This is 1962. He states, quote, it's ridiculous that a city, talking about D.C., that's 61% Negro, to have a police force composed of 20% Negro. He forced the Metropolitan Police Department to hire more African-American police officers. He did vote against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So people like Ira Shapiro said he opposed civil rights legislation. Not true. Totally inaccurate. Byrd he voted for the 1957 Civil Rights Act. It was the first Civil Rights Act since Reconstruction. He voted for the 1960 Civil Rights Act. In fact, he and Senator John F. Kennedy co-sponsored the amendment that gave the teeth to that particular Civil Rights Act. It was an amendment that gave the federal government power to investigate and prosecute bombings on minority churches, minority establishments, churches and schools. So it's just totally wrong to say he opposed all civil rights legislation. He did oppose the 64 Civil Rights Bill. Before I discuss that, lead into a little bit to show you where Byrd's coming from. Because he votes against something, everybody makes the assumption he's racist. It's not that easy with Byrd. Byrd was a highly complex, complicated figure, as well as dynamic figure, but he's very complicated. And first and foremost was the Constitution. He had to do things by the Constitution. A few years before the Civil Rights Act, in 1960, the Senate was considering legislation to abolish the poll tax. Byrd voted against it. He voted against the legislation to abolish the poll tax. Everybody know the poll tax device Southern states used to keep African Americans from voting. Byrd voted against the legislation to abolish the poll tax. His explanation was the Constitution allows states to set their own voting standards, set their own voting qualifications. Therefore, if Congress is going to step in and abolish the poll tax, it has to be done by a constitutional amendment, because the Constitution does allow states to set their own voting standards. Byrd said, do it right, I can support it, but I cannot support it this way, it's unconstitutional. That legislation went down to defeat. 2 years later, the Senate comes back with a constitutional amendment to abolish the poll tax. Byrd votes for it. When it's approved, the constitutional amendments go to state legislatures for approval. When the West Virginia State Senate approved the constitutional amendment to abolish the poll tax, excuse me, Byrd writes that the president of the West Virginia State Senate, expressing his appreciation for the vote, says that, quote, it's a commitment to freedom for all Americans, end of quotes. Now we come to the 64 Civil Rights Act. He did filibuster it. And in the filibuster, a 14-hour filibuster. Here's the filibuster. It's really not a filibuster per se, because he spoke overnight. He did not block any legislation, did not block any votes. In fact, under agreement with Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, he ended his talk 20 minutes before the vote. So he wasn't blocking the vote. He spoke overnight. Now, people have not read the filibuster. Read it. It's a fascinating document. People don't. They just call it a racist rant. It's not a racist rant. There's not one racial word in the whole thing. What it is, it's a lawyer's brief. I'll tell you what I mean, because he's citing all his objections to Pacific. He never opposed the Civil Rights Bill per se, the entire entity. He's opposed to certain provisions in it which he considered unconstitutional. And that's why he's trying to show where it's unconstitutional. See, it's a lawyer's brief here on one page. He cites 7 different Supreme Court cases. Reese versus U.S., Gwynn versus U.S., Pope versus Williams. He cites 7 cases. Take my word for it. On one page, like I say, it's a lawyer's brief showing why provisions in the 64 Civil Rights Bill he cannot support because he considers it unlawful and unconstitutional. And again, he's not opposed to a lot of the objectives being sought here. What he's opposed to is the way it's being done. On this one page, he states, I thoroughly concur in the apparent objective which is being sought here. It goes on to explain it. Another phrase, I support the objective being sought. So the objective here is a worthy one. All the way through, he's saying the objective's good. The trouble is the means. It's considered unconstitutional. A lot of these provisions. One of them, what this particular page is dealing with is literacy test. Everybody knows the literacy test device Southern states use to deprive African Americans the right to vote. 2 things wrong with the literacy test. They were oral and could be subjective. It was left at the hands of the local registrar. So what was happening if a white person went into a white registrar, we're talking about the South now, if a white person goes in to take a literacy test to qualify for vote, the registrar could say, give me the first 3 letters of the alphabet. Well, ABC. Okay, you're literate. African American comes in to register to vote, give me the Greek alphabet backwards. Well, it can't do it. You're illiterate. That's probably a little extreme, but that's what was going on. 2 things about it, because it was oral, there's no written record, so nobody could grab the records to say, look, this is discrimination. There's no written record. And like I said, it was leaving it at the hands of the local registrar. So Byrd runs into the same problem deal with poll tax. If Congress is going to abolish the literacy test, it has to be done by constitutional amendment. Or he actually suggests, now the difference between Byrd and the Southern senators who are hiding behind the Constitution to block legislation, Byrd was trying to propose solutions, recommendations, how we can get around this, like say, do it by constitutional amendment. Or here he proposed, I thought it was interesting, perhaps we could have a national literacy standard, a written one, to prevent the oral, subjective oral problems. He states here, he goes on right here, if a white registrar is so included, he may, under current law, he may, by use of oral tests, disqualify colored voters and qualify white voters simply by administering more difficult tests to the former or requiring less in connection with the latter. He's recognizing the problem. He goes on to propose his solutions to it. So he's not, like say, it's not a racist filibuster by any means. He's opposed to provisions. He's trying to get it corrected. The voting District of Columbia, home rule for District of Columbia, that would give the District of Columbia representation in Congress. Yes, he votes against it. when it's being done by statute. Byrd, the Constitution only allows states and territories to be represented in Congress. States and territories only to be represented in Congress. Washington, D.C. is not a state, it's not a territory, it's a city. Therefore, if you're going to, you cannot allow a city to be represented in Congress. It's not provided for in the Constitution. So Byrd, that's the reason Byrd opposes home rule by statute. He tries to explain that this also requires a constitutional amendment. Now, like our Shapiro said, he says he opposed voting rights for D.C., with Washington, D.C. being 60% African American. He's saying that's why Byrd opposes home rule for Washington, D.C., because it's racist. It's not why Byrd does it. He does it because, like I said, the Constitution only allows states and territories to be represented in Congress. Byrd said, do it right, he'll support it. This one really aggravates me because, the record is clear. When he becomes Senate Majority Leader in 1977, he has Ted Kennedy introduce a constitutional amendment to grant voting rights to the District of Columbia. And Byrd votes for it. There's his vote. He voted for it. So don't sit there and tell me he opposed voting rights for District of Columbia. That's just not accurate. And just a little research and get the story straight. But people don't do it. The book I'm working on right now, I start out with a quote from Charles Darwin, Origins of the Species. He states, quote, "Great is the power of constant misrepresentation," end quote. Exactly what goes on with Robert Byrd. People start the stuff, especially negative stuff, it's repeat, and people just accept it. Excuse me. Byrd does oppose Thurgood Marshall to the Supreme Court. Our Shapiro points out Thurgood Marshall was the first African American to be nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. Byrd opposes that. Shapiro implies he's racist for opposing a black person be appointed to the Supreme Court. Wrong again. Byrd supported the appointment of Thurgood Marshall to U.S. Court of Appeals. He supported the appointment of Thurgood Marshall to be Solicitor General of the United States. What he votes against him for the Supreme Court because he does not want liberal activists on the Supreme Court. Not because he's liberal, because he's activist. This is Byrd for you. He's opposed to activists being on the Supreme Court. Activists on the Supreme Court, or any court, he felt were making policy. Judges are not there. Congress makes policy, not judges. The judges are there to interpret the law. The president's there to enforce the law. Congress makes the law. And he did not want activists on the Supreme Court for that reason. He votes against Thurgood Marshall because liberal activists. He also voted against Abe Johnson's appointment of Abe Fortas to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for the very same reason. Byrd throughout his career would be very consistent on this one. He would always support conservative, strict constructionist judges because, again, he did not want activists on there making policy. It's clear on that. Only two times I know that he voted against conservative, strict constructionists being appointed to the court. One was Robert Bork. Do you remember him? Robert Bork, and why he opposed Bork? He opposed Bork for political reasons, not for his judicial reasons. Bork was the Nixon person who carried out the Saturday Night Massacre. He's Deputy Attorney General. When Nixon fired Elliot Richardson and Ruckelshaus, then he brought in Bork as Assistant Deputy Attorney General, had him fire the Special Prosecutor. That's what Byrd was concerned about, the politicization of the Supreme Court. So Byrd opposes Bork. I was in the Judiciary Committee room when Byrd looks at Bork and says, "The fact you're a conservative doesn't bother me because I don't want another Warren Court in my lifetime," end of quote. As soon as he said that, oh God, I know how it's going to be portrayed. Sure enough, it was. That he opposed the Warren Court for Brown versus the Board of Education. That wasn't the case at all. Byrd was in the House of Representatives when the Supreme Court desegregated the schools. He never spoke against it, did not sign the Southern Manifesto. It wasn't the case at all. Byrd was opposed the Warren Court for, anybody take a shot? Byrd? Prayer in school. That's what upset Byrd about the Warren Court, taking prayer out of school. And that's why he's furious about when the decision came down, prayer in school, Byrd went out to the Senate floor and gave almost a 2-hour speech blasting the court for that decision. He's also furious with Warren Court for the Miranda decision. Byrd being such a law and order person, he opposed the court for Warren Court. That's why he did not want liberal activists on the court. He'd be very consistent on that. And that's why he opposed the Warren Court, not again because of desegregating the schools. Now, to the Ku Klux Klan background. I'll try to get some of the records straight. It's not a racist record by any means. The thing that stands out is background with Ku Klux Klan. To get you to understand Byrd and Klan, you have to start out the Klan of the 1920s, for reasons I'll get to make clear in a second. First, I have to ask you, it's going to sound weird, it's going to sound strange, don't stereotype the Ku Klux Klan. Everybody thinks Ku Klux Klan, they think the Klan of the Deep South. The sheets, the hoods, going around dragging people out of their homes in the middle of the night, torturing and murdering people. It's not that simple in the 1920s. 1920s, more than 5 million Americans joined the KKK. That'd be equivalent to 15 million Americans today. And it's scattered across the country. In the 1920s, more than half the membership of the KKK was in northern urban areas. Northern urban areas, the Klan had to deal with northern police forces. Cousin Billy Bob wasn't the county sheriff. Had to deal with northern police, had to take on different things. It arises in different sections of the country for different reasons. Read Kenneth Jackson's book, The Ku Klux Klan in the Cities. He talks about why it rises in different areas for different reasons. The lieutenant governor of Indiana belongs to the Klan. The vice president of the University of Oklahoma belonged to the Klan. In southern West Virginia, reason for the rise, it's what gets fascinating to me. Reason for the rise is in the early 1920s, when the coal companies bust the Union, UMW in West Virginia. Followed Battle of Blair Mountain, Jacksonville Agreement. Those reasons, Union declines, goes from more than 90,000 membership to less than 600. There is no more UMW. So what do oppressed and exploited workers do when faced with corporate and state power? Join throughout the country, throughout the world, actually, they join clandestine organizations. In Pennsylvania, they joined the Molly Maguires. In the Italian plantation workers. In Louisiana, joined the Black Hand. In southern West Virginia, they joined the Ku Klux Klan before it started forming the Ku Klux Klan. Do you buy it? This is New York Times, April 16th, 1922. I want to show you, it's a full page. The column in the left-hand corner, winding golf men opposed to strike, union organization. Winding golf, remember that's where Byrd lived. Well, I'll show you the next. That's the headlines, catch the sub-headline, union organization like Klan campaign of terror. Now that's when the New York Times is talking about big business people are really anti-labor. Paragraph 5. Can everybody read it? No, it's Winding Golf Coalfield. That's the Klan Byrd's father belonged to. He worked in Winding Golf Coalfields. If you're still having trouble believing me, everybody knows Studs Terkel's book, Hard Times. Studs Terkel was a talking head in Chicago. He had a radio show and everything, but his big fame was became an oral historian, really the first prominent oral historian. And he would interview Americans about major events in their lives and careers. About major events in American history, how it affected them. There's one book on World War II, how World War II affected American people, oral history of World War II, called The Good War. He does the Great Depression, that's the Hard Times. In the book, he interviews Aaron Barkin. Aaron Barkin is a coal miner from Logan County, West Virginia. I'm quoting Aaron Barkin in the interview with Studs Terkel. The UMW deteriorated, went back to almost no existence in the 1920s. So most people ganged up and formed the Ku Klux Klan. My dad, my older brother, belonged to it. My dad was one of the leaders till he died. The company brought in the army to get the Ku Klux out, but it didn't work. The Union and Ku Klux were about the same thing. So a woman I interviewed for Life Work Rebellion, Granny Church, she stated, quote, she was quite blunt, the Klan of the 20s was the Union of the 30s, end of quote. Before I read this next part, I've got to show you the next one. Gets more unbelievable if you... What'd I do? Need help here. I'm a very low-tech person. I do somewhat. While he's doing that, I'll go ahead and read this to you. I wanted to show you the slide first. The Ku Klux was formed on behalf, I'm quoting Aaron Barkin again, the Ku Klux was formed on behalf of people that wanted a decent living, both black and white. Half the coal camp was collared. Yet, the Klan wasn't anti-collared. This one, there was 2 collared who belonged to it. Seeing African Americans belong to the Klan. I remember those 2 coming around asking around my father and asking questions about it. They joined. The pastor of our community church was a colored man. He was Ku Klux. It was the only protection the working man had. Talking about during the 1920s. I was really glad to find that, 'cause when I was interviewing coal miners back in the 1970s, I was interviewing coal miners 65 years and older for Life Work Rebellion. I interviewed 3 African-American coal miners who told me the same thing. They belonged to the Klan and joined the Klan to fight the coal companies. That's the real story of the Klan in southern West Virginia. It's kind of interesting. I want you to see a slide, so bear with me. Even those who didn't join had weird experiences with KKK. Walter Hale, he lived in Itman. He was African American. He came out from Alabama. He'd been working in West Virginia for a few days. He'd been in West Virginia for a few days, and he worked late. He worked too late one night. It was dark when he came out of the coal mine. He couldn't find his way home. He was having trouble finding his way home in the dark. So he's walking down a railroad track, and here comes his buddy in the coal mine. And from the coal mine, his buddy in the coal mine, a white guy. And he had a sheet on and carrying a hood. I about panicked. This guy's from Alabama. He knows the Klan we all know and hate from Alabama. But he sees his buddy wearing a sheet and carrying a hood. He about panics because I thought he was a good guy. And the guy his buddy comes up to him, Walter, what are you doing here? You live back over there. He tried to explain to him it was nighttime, dark. I couldn't find the hollow that I live up. And the guy tells him, well, I'll tell you what, our meeting's supposed to start in about a half hour. He goes, when we light up that cross, it lights up the whole valley. He goes, I'll see if we can start our meeting early so you can find your way home. So they go down and start the meeting early so this African American can find his way home. Another one, John Schofield, lived in a small little town outside of Pineville. He was from the South, I think he was South Carolina. He was telling me he had been up here for a few days, maybe a week or so. He hears commotion outside his house. And he hears commotion outside his house. He looks out the window and he sees all these people in white sheets gathered around a cross. He about panics. Thinking, oh my God, didn't expect this. And he and his wife get real nervous about what's going on here. And about the time 3 or 4 white men come up to his porch, he yells at his wife, get the kids out the back door. He'll try to hold them off. By the time somebody goes, John, hollers John to him. And they were hollering his name like your friends. So he finally opened the door. They were having their meeting, and they forgot to bring matches to light the cross. They're coming over to John Schofield's house to get matches to light the cross. True stories come on tape talking about want to show you one, this one coming up. Hopefully we'll get to it. Anyway, I'm going to go on and talk about Byrd. It's Byrd and race issue. And it's not like you've been told, well, you seem, well, everybody assumes. I'd like to back up a little bit, talk about some other stuff about Byrd, because he's really a remarkable person. Like I say, he's a complicated, complex person. I started out with Senator Byrd as a congressional fellow, sponsored by American Historical Association. I point that out because I really don't think I would have taken a job with him at the time, because I didn't like him. This early 1980s, before I knew about him, I did not like him. He had been a hawk on the Vietnam War, and I was an anti-war protester. One of those anti-war protesters. He's always denouncing in rather ugly terms at times. And I was aware of what the media portrayed as his racist conservative views. That's much more to the left. But I was teaching history at the University of Maryland. And I was awarded the Congressional Fellowship to work on Capitol Hill for a year with the American Historical Association paying my salary. So I thought it'd be neat to go to work in the U.S. Senate for a year, then go back to teaching with a lot of good stories, good experiences. Well, I went to work, and I saw the Senate Democratic leadership was looking for a writer, so I applied for that, and they hired me with the American Historical Association, paying my salary. They hired me. So I went to work there and immediately learned that Byrd was nothing like I expected or anticipated or read or heard about. He was far different. Immediately became fascinated with the person. Such a dynamic person. Look at his accomplishments. They're incredible. They go on forever. It's just not what he did for West Virginia. They'll be listed on the stand coming in from the Byrd Center in a couple of weeks. But its accomplishments on the national stage, that's often overlooked, in fact, ignored for the most part. That's the reason I try bringing out in my book. It's the reason I took the approach I did, Byrd and 11 Presidents, to emphasize his role on the national stage, which is often overlooked. If you haven't read the chapter, he was the person really who exposed the Watergate cover-up. Never really given credit for it. Senator Bill Proxmire called Byrd, quote, the unsung hero of Watergate, because he was one that really exposed the Watergate cover-up. The Clinton presidency, he saved it. And remember, Clinton had been impeached. Impeachment came to the Senate for a vote to removal from office. And there's the impeachment depended on 5 Democrats. And Byrd was the leader of the 5. If the Republicans needed to get Byrd to go against Clinton, and Byrd did not like Clinton, which is interesting. Did not like Clinton. He didn't like the way he ran the White House. He thought he disgraced the White House. He didn't like most of his policies. Did not like Clinton. But he saved Clinton. He finally decided he could not vote for removal from office. I go into this in the book, why he did it. But he really had a very prominent role in the national stage. His contributions are incredible, but the more amazing thing to me is the Senate records he established. I love to talk about his Senate records. Set the stage for you, set the picture. When Byrd comes to the Senate in 1959, the U.S. Senate wasn't composed of what the Washington Post term, not me being politically incorrect, Washington Post calls the pygmies of today, into quotes. The Senate wasn't composed of the pygmies of today. When he came to the Senate in 1959, he had a lot of the giants of 20th century American politics were there. Lyndon Johnson was majority leader. He had Hubert Humphrey, John F. Kennedy, Jacob Javits, Paul Douglas from Illinois, one of my favorite senators. The list goes on. Everett Dirksen. It's really the giants of 20th century American politics were there. Here comes this meat cutter, grocery store clerk, grocery store owner from a grubby little coal camp in the hills of southern West Virginia. He would be dismissed as a country bumpkin into, what's the other term he applied to, a country bumpkin? A rustic boob. He was also called a rustic boob. He'd be ridiculed as Jed Clampett. His critics would denounce him as a racist hillbilly. This country bumpkin, this rustic boob, would go on to become the longest serving senator in American history, cast more votes than any other senator in American history. All right. Cast more votes than any other senator in history. Finish these points, we'll get back to the screen here in a minute. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Randy. Sorry, I'll try to be better. He cast more votes be a long-serving senator who cast more votes than any other senator in history. Critics would say, well, it's just those hillbillies from West Virginia kept electing into office. That's why he never lost an election in 60 years. Wrong again. U.S. senators would elect him to more Senate leadership positions than any other senator in history. So it's senators electing Byrd to these positions, as well as people in West Virginia. He's elected 3 times as Senate Majority Leader. It's 95th, 96th, and 100th Congresses. Those were by far the 3 most productive Congresses in the last half century. The reason they were so productive, Byrd was the leader. Leaders know how to get things done, and Byrd was a leader. He got things done. A couple of examples for you. Well, I get so sick and tired, I should qualify it. So sick and tired of hearing people say today, well, nothing could be done in Congress. Congress is so divided. The trouble is leadership. Real leaders could bring it together and get things done. Lyndon Johnson was Majority Leader during the McCarthy era, when Republicans were attacking Democrats for 20 years of treason. And don't get any bitter and more divided than that. But Johnson still got an incredible amount of legislation enacted. The interstate highway system, National Defense Education Act, the 2 civil rights bills I mentioned earlier, 57 and 60 civil rights bill. Johnson was able to reach out and get things done. Byrd did too. The way Byrd would do it, it was just fascinating to watch the guy in action. Reagan's veto of the highway bill. I love that one. Reagan, the highway bill that Byrd really wanted because it would help out West Virginia. West Virginia stood to get a lot of money. Reagan vetoed it. So when they moved to override the veto, Byrd puts an amendment on there. We need 5 Republican votes. We need 5 Republican votes to override the veto. Byrd puts an amendment on to raise the speed limits. Remember the 55-mile-an-hour speed limits? Byrd puts an amendment on to allow 65 mile an hour in non-urban areas. There wasn't a total repeal. That comes in 1995. This is 1987. Byrd does the amendment. He actually gives it to Steve Sims of Idaho to introduce it, a Republican. Had Steve Sims. Sims probably didn't know what was going on. He introduced it. Western senators were under heavy pressure to raise those speed limits. You know, out west where you drive for 100 miles without a curve, they're really under heavy pressure to raise the speed limits. So Byrd puts that amendment on to raise the speed limits. And those constituents in western states start writing their senators, vote for this thing. So we got our 5 Republican votes, overrode the Reagan veto. That's the way Byrd operated. One of my favorites examples, Byrd was introducing legislation one time. Senator John Chafee, Republican from Rhode Island, stands up to object. Byrd goes, will the senior senator from Rhode Island yield for a moment? And Chafee yields to him. Byrd goes, I just want to thank him for that card he sent me. It was such a nice card. He didn't have to do that. It was such a nice note inside. He didn't have to do that. I was glad to help him get that project for his state, his beautiful state. And that was my pleasure. And he didn't have to send it, but I really appreciate the gesture. And I just want to take a minute to thank him for that card. Chafee stands up because the senior senator understands the message and the remarks from the chairman of the Appropriations Committee to ensure that he will have the opportunity of sending more such cards in the future. I'm withdrawing my objection. And, you know, it's classic Byrd. Every now and then the press, Washington press, gets onto congressional staff. Congressional staff gets a lot of perks. You have to, because otherwise they're competing with the lobbyists and law firms downtown. So we get a lot of perks to help compensate because of the salaries. When Senator Mitchell was Majority Leader, one of the things they got on was the Senate gift shop had below market value on a lot of products. People go there to do their Christmas shopping and stuff like that. The press said it's not right, get below market value. If you had to show your Senate ID, you got below market value. It said it's not right, so Mitchell finally caves in, tells the Senate gift shop to raise its prices. When Byrd was Majority Leader, the press got on free parking. Shame staffers get free parking. People work downtown, they pay $2,000 to $3,000 a year for parking. So why should congressional staffers get free parking? Byrd doesn't argue with them. He introduced a resolution to abolish all free parking, all designated parking, except for members of Congress. Abolishes all free parking. all designated parking. All of a sudden the press realized, whoa, that includes us. That includes us. They backed off that issue real quick. It'd been a nightmare, because they get designated parking, they can drive right up and go into a committee hearing, get a parking space, go into a committee hearing. Those days would be gone. So they backed off. That's the way Byrd operated. He always found a way. He always found a way. When Daschle was minority leader, we would go to Daschle with an idea, with a proposition. Daschle, oh, we can't do that. We don't have the votes. You never heard Byrd say that. You simply never heard Byrd say that. You went out and got the votes. That's the way Byrd operated. He went out and got the votes. He was a master at it. Show you a difference of attitude too. Daschle was Senate minority leader. Byrd, when he was majority, we were in a majority, he was the Senate majority leader. When we were minority, he was the Democratic leader. He didn't recognize the minority status. He was the Democratic leader, and that's what you called him. You didn't dare call him the minority leader. It's just a whole different mentality. But the big thing was, like I say, we could go to Byrd with an idea. He'd really fight for it, go for it. He's an incredible person, getting things done, getting things accomplished. Speaking of Senate records, two of my favorite records don't get much attention. They're lesser known, but I really talk about them because they're vintage Byrd. First one, March 8th, 1960. March 8th, 1960. He sets the record for presiding over the Senate for the longest continuous period, 21 hours and 8 minutes. 21 hours and 8 minutes. He says, then on February 27th, 1989, he sets the record for the shortest session in history, presiding over the shortest session in history, 0.6 of a second. The reason I like those two, the presiding over the Senate for the longest continuous period of time, it comes to, like, say, March 8th, 1960, at the beginning of Byrd's second year in the U.S. Senate. So he seems determined right from the start to make his mark on the U.S. Senate. Right there he does. He's been in the Senate just a little over 1 year. He's already established an all-time Senate record. Other thing, he's going to make his mark on the U.S. Senate. The other thing I think he probably intended to do, I never talked to him about it, but I'm just reading in here, was he's out to impress Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson. Byrd and Johnson bonded immediately when Byrd came to the Senate. They bonded immediately. That's the reason Johnson put him on Appropriations Committee. But he still wanted to impress Lyndon Johnson. And by doing things like that, presiding over the Senate for 21 hours and 8 minutes, he did exactly that. When he broke the record, Johnson took to the Senate floor and made a big announcement about it. He congratulates, as Johnson said when Byrd broke the record, congratulates the Senator for the longest period of continuous presiding over the Senate. And he goes on to praise him. I know of no other higher tribute that I can pay to the young senator than say he knows his duty and he does it. I'm very proud of the record of the senator from West Virginia. He goes on to praise him. So he's out to impress Lyndon Johnson. He does. The other one I like, 0.6 of a second, because it shows Byrd. That was in 1989. He's 72 years of age. And he's still determined to make a mark on the Senate. He'd just become president pro tempore of the Senate. Also showed how he worked with staff. So many of the senators treat staff like ornaments, or law clerks who bring in the law book to the senator, and the senator reads the law book, makes his profound judgment, all that stuff. Byrd worked with staff. He had good staff, very talented staff, and he worked with them. He's always the boss, never a question about that, but he'd work with the staff. And this was one example. We were all sitting around one time talking about the fact he'd become president tempore. Well, a good chance for you to break more records. And I don't know how it came up. I never was quite sure. Byrd actually gave me credit for it. I'm sure I didn't do it. But we talked about, well, he could preside over the shortest session in Senate history. He liked that idea. And it might have been him that brought it up. But anyway, the idea was, as president of the Senate, he presides over Senate. He called in session, called out of session. So he's practicing. He takes the gavel and he calls it into session. Then he calls it out of session, whacks it again. And we said, somebody asked him, Senator, what determines when the Senate comes into session, when it comes out, is when you make the announcement or when the gavel. He said the gavel. He said, okay, then make the announcement for. Now this all of us talking together, staff and the senator. We're all talking together on this, throwing out the ideas. So make the announcement, call the Senate into session first, pound the gavel, then pound it again, and call it out of session. So doing rapid succession. So Byrd, he practices. We practiced with him a couple of hours in this. He calls Senate into session, and then he, pounds it again. And somebody said, "No, don't lift it. Don't lift it. You lose time when you lift it. Just kind of scoot it." And from one point to another, then call it out of session. So that's what he did. He practiced that. We'd be around with stopwatches, and we got him down to 9/10 of a second. But then the great day came, February 27th. We had him out there presiding over the Senate, and he did it in 6/10 of a second, all-time Senate record. You gotta love the guy. Worked with staff. Talk about working with staff. Give you another one. Well, you listen to staff. Got here someplace. Good things out of order. I didn't think I'd get this far. Do you remember CBS several years ago planned to do the reality show, The Real Beverly Hillbillies, where they'd take a family from Appalachia, put them in Hollywood, and keep cameras on them to watch the family try to adjust, this Appalachian family try to adjust to the glitz and glamour of Rodeo Drive, and so the nation would sit back and laugh at them as they tried to adjust. I was horrified when I read it. I'm not a politically correct person, but to me, that went way over the top. And I called our chief of staff and talked to her about it and how furious I was about it. And she ran by Byrd. Byrd was furious about it. So do the speech, Dave. Okay, do the speech. So I did the speech where I blasted CBS for the whole concept. And blasted CBS, got NBC in there too with some of Jay Leno's remarks about Appalachians. But anyway, I do the speech. And I trash a lot of the programs which ridicule Appalachians. Talking about the Appalachian bashing on TV. I ridiculed it and blasted it. In the speech, I included the Waltons. And our proofreader, as well as our chief of staff, stunned. I would include the Waltons in it. And everybody doesn't see that in the same light as programs like the Beverly Hillbillies. And I convinced them, leave it in. Well, Barbara, our chief of staff, warned me, saying, Dave, Senator Byrd likes the Waltons, stresses a lot of the down-home values that he likes to stress, patriotism and honesty, family, and stuff like that. And I said, just leave it in. I'll talk to the senator about it. So when I gave this copy of speech to Byrd, Byrd's sitting there looking over the speech. The whole thing comes to the Waltons. He goes, the Waltons, I like the Waltons. I said, why do you have the Waltons in there? I said, Senator, to me, it's the worst of the lot. The way it romanticizes poverty. And the others are just stupid, corny shows, but the Waltons actually romanticizes poverty. And poverty's ugly, it's brutal. And you don't see that in the Waltons. The senator and I were talking, I said, let's look at it this way, Senator. You graduated first in your class in high school, but you didn't go to college. Why not? Because my parents couldn't afford it. I said, yes, sir, that's poverty. Poverty's ugly, it denies opportunity. That's poverty for you. He goes, Dale, I see what you mean, Dale, I see what you mean. So he left it in. So this is the speech. I won't read the whole thing, just one paragraph here. Trashing television's treatment of Appalachians. Television has certainly been part of this Appalachian bashing. Green Acres feature farming mountain folks conversing with a talking pig. The Dukes of Hazzard featured stereotypical mountain folk jumping into and out of cars without bothering to open doors and a car horn that played Dixie. Even the Waltons, a series with numerous morally uplifting episodes and storylines that promoted hard work, love of family, honesty, patriotism, spirituality, can be faulted for its beautifully romanticized version of poverty. It portrayed poverty as a way of life that nurtures rather than inhibits, that builds character rather than denies opportunity. All of a sudden, Byrd puts down speech, he just looks up. I've seen poverty. I'm one of poverty's children. I've known poverty, and poverty has known me. I can tell you, poverty is beautiful only if you're not poor, end of quote. He would work with staff and listen to staff. He just wasn't some arbitrary tyrant who just imposed his will upon everybody. Finally get to the screen. This one I wanted to say, to me this is unbelievable. I already kind of destroyed the punchline telling you about African Americans belonging to the KKK. It's in Rotherfield, West Virginia. It's a headline you probably never expected to see. That's the entire newspaper story, August 26, 1925. And that's the story of our third column from the right. The second column from the right, I'm sorry. Everybody read it? Oh, let me come back to that. This was the Klan Byrd's father belonged to. Byrd's father would take his son with him to the meetings. So this was Byrd's picture of the Klan. Now this is not, okay, I should have followed this up at the time, sorry. Got uncoordinated here with the thing, but okay, this is Byrd's image. He'd go to the meetings with his father. He went to the meetings with his father, and this was the image of the Klan that he grew up with. So in 1941, Byrd does form a Klavern and recruits members into it. I've read where it's been, I'm never asking how many, but 15, other people say 150. I'm not sure how many he recruited. But he recruited a Klavern and created a Klavern. And in the first meeting, they liked him, Exalted Cyclops, or one of those names that they have. He serves as an officer. So then he writes the letter, the famous letter, quoted, the first line's always quoted. He writes the letter to the Imperial Wizard, Green, and said, the line's always quoted. I don't think anybody's ever read the whole letter. The line's always quoted, the Klan is needed here like never before, end of quotes. He does write the letter, but nobody ever goes on to read the entire letter. The rest of the letter goes on right after that. He starts talking about Beckley being the rising industrial center of West Virginia. You've got coal miners all around, you've got industries rising up. Beckley's become the industrial center of West Virginia. It's a union organizing letter. He's talking about all these non-organized industrial workers. In the second part of the letter, he talks about Beckley becoming the political center of West Virginia. The governor of West Virginia is from Beckley. Harley Kilgore is the U.S. Senator from Beckley. So Beckley's the political center of West Virginia. So that's what the letter's about to the Grand Imperial Wizard. He's talking about why the Klan is needed. Everybody quotes the first line, the Klan is needed here like never before, but they do not quote the rest of the letter. They had never even read it, they just know the one line and quote that. Byrd does, the Imperial Wizard does not make it to West Virginia, but he has the head of the Ku Klux Klan of Virginia come to West Virginia. He meets with Byrd and conducts a meeting. All of a sudden Byrd, whoa, he hears the wizard, the head of the Klan of Virginia in 1941, that ain't my dad's surrogate Union Klan. This is the real Klan. This is the Klan we all know and hate. So he drops out, a few weeks later he drops out, and everybody else he recruited drops out. The Klan disintegrates. So when I talk about the Klan being the Union Klan, that was the 1920s, not 1940s. 1940s, we're back to the Klan we all know and hate. And like I say, when Byrd realized, he would later say, quote, I didn't realize its principles had changed. No center, now seeing the real Klan. So then it's when he drops out. We'll leave some time for questions. Got questions?
Hopefully. When did the Klan start turning? They've always been portrayed. Like if you've seen the movie Mississippi Burning, they take the coward out with lynching and such. We've always portrayed the Klan as being negative. This is the first time I've heard of it being talked like this.
No, this is exclusive. It was uniquely to West Virginia, but other areas it does different things. Other areas. I'm not saying not exonerating the Klan like in the South, and the Klan of the South in the 1920s be like you're describing. It's the same vicious Klan that was there in the 1870s. was there again in 1920, second raised the ugly head again. You have D.W. Griffith's movie, Birth of a Nation, come out glorifying the Ku Klux Klan for its ways and stuff like that. That's a good point, though. D.W. Griffith's movie, Birth of a Nation, which glorifies the Klan, you know it, was banned in 3 states. It's banned in 3 states because of the racial overtones. Massachusetts, Ohio, and West Virginia. West Virginia state government would not let it be shown in West Virginia. But I don't mean to whitewash the Klan by any means. In areas of the country, especially in the South, it's the ways portraying Mississippi burning. It would remain so. But just 1920s, different areas of the country, it was different things.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. That was
People are just stunned to see it. Other questions?
What do you know about Byrd's surviving family?
Well, his daughter just died. Can you answer?
Well, I'll just tell you one interesting thing. His grandson, Eric Fatimi, still works in Washington, D.C., and his daughter just applied and was accepted at Wake Forest. And when she took the AP History exam, one of the questions on that exam was, who was the author of the speech, "We stand passively mute"? And that was the speech Senator Byrd gave at the outbreak of the war that he liked to say went around the world 2 times. So just a little piece of trivia I picked up to share.
That's good.
Not horning in on your lecture, Dr. Corbin.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah, know his family better than I do. I never really knew the family. In fact, I didn't know me until the funeral.
Well, both daughters live very close to Senator Byrd, one in Leesburg and one in McLean, and they're still in their houses, but his younger daughter died, and she had 2 daughters who are still living with families of their own, and the other daughter lived just down the street from the Byrds, and they had 3 sons, 2 of whom became physicists, and one who's the one I mentioned working in D.C.
Thanks, Ann. Other questions? Wilma, no question. Can you stay for a minute afterwards? I need to ask you about something, please. Yeah.
Could you state the name of that movie again that is banned in the 3 states?
Birth of the Nation.
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation? Okay.
Same title of a recent movie dealing with Turner's Rebellion, Birth of a Nation. But D.W. Griffith, and it's 1919 production. It's amazing production for 1919. It's just the message in it.
And another question, I'm sorry. Could you elaborate some on the friction that Byrd had caused when he was in D.C. about bringing money to West Virginia, about the pork barrel, about, some of the naval, I guess it's some of the things that you mentioned in your book. I think that he caused a lot of friction there sometimes.
Yeah, he did. But actually, jealousy to us, it wasn't pork barrel, it was reparations, when John F. Kennedy came into office, West Virginia got less money from the federal government than any other state in the nation. And West Virginia's always been neglected by the federal government. So Byrd was just finally getting money back due to West Virginia. It had been neglected for so long. So that never bothered us. He caught hell for it, and he didn't care. As long as he could tell. That's why he stepped down. When he stepped down and sent majority leader to take appropriations, he says, I want to be West Virginia's billion-dollar industry. Nobody took him seriously. That's a direct quote, I want to be West Virginia's billion-dollar industry. He surpassed that in a year and a half. He's poured money into the state. And he's having a ball doing it. And people complained, they griped and everything else, and he didn't care. He's helping out the state. We didn't care. But it was amazing, like still with all the money he's pouring into West Virginia, like the county I live in, Anne Arundel County, Maryland, still gets more federal money than the entire state of West Virginia. Anne Arundel County has a lot of different federal projects, has BWI Airport and has the Naval Academy and all this stuff like that, but nevertheless, other areas also get a lot of federal money. And so Byrd was like, say, just making do, getting back to West Virginia, some stuff due to West Virginia. And he didn't care about the friction. We didn't either. Does that help?
Yeah.
Because I have I guess it's a two-part question. What would he consider his greatest accomplishment? And then what would he think that he wanted to accomplish but did not?
It's a tough one. They didn't help me on this one, but his greatest accomplishment wouldn't be individual projects, but all the stuff he was able to help out West Virginia and do for West Virginia. It'd be number one. National level, probably one he took most pride in, put it that way, was Constitution Day, where he requires schools to teach about Constitution. When Constitution Day, September 17th comes up, schools are required to spend, so much time talking about the Constitution, teach about the Constitution. On that, I've got to tell you one story. I think I can get it out. It's on September 17th, Constitution Day. He used to give a talk in Chester, West Virginia. And, Chester, very top, the northern panhandle, very top. It's a 6.5-hour drive from Washington, D.C. And that's when his wife was so sick, and he would not leave her overnight. So we were going to have to come back. He spoke at 6 o'clock at night. We were going to get back to 4 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, on the way out there, Byrd loved butterscotch sundaes, especially from Dairy Queen. He had a fetish for butterscotch. Sorry to tell the story, isn't it? He loved butterscotch sundaes. He fell asleep in the RV, a huge RV, and he falls asleep in it. He wakes up, he sees Dairy Queen sign this in Frostburg, Maryland, and he wants his butterscotch sundae. So we pull over in the big RV, pull up in the Dairy Queen, and he always liked to be first in line. I guess he liked to see shock on the person's face whenever he looked up, saw it was Robert Byrd. But anyway, he's first in line, and he'd been asleep. He woke up, wants the butterscotch sundae, so he's standing in line, and the 15-year-old girl takes his orders, looks up and goes, "Can I have your order, sir?" Byrd's offended. She doesn't recognize him. Goes, "Don't you know who I am?" And Tom Gavin, his press sergeant, and I are on his side. We're in Western Maryland Center, in Western Maryland. And he goes, "Don't you know who I am?" She goes, "No." He goes, "I'm Robert Byrd." She looks at us, so what? And Byrd's really offended. And we keep saying we're in Western Maryland Center. We're in Western Maryland. He still doesn't get the message. And Byrd's really offended. She doesn't recognize it. He goes, "Are you in school?" "Yes." He goes, Good. He goes, "What's your favorite subjects?" And she's math and science. And Byrd goes, "What about history?" Goes, "Oh, I hate history. It's dull and boring." And Byrd jumps back. Looks at me and goes, "I never heard anybody not liking history." And I said, "Senator, that's the way some people teach it, make it dull and boring." He goes, "Okay." And Tom Gavin, press person, and I were looking at each other. "God, get us out here, bring the food, do something." And Tom goes, "Well, at least it can't get any worse." About the time Byrd looks at her and goes, "Do you know what today is?" I looked at Tom, it just got worse. She goes, "Yes, it's Constitution Day." He just beamed. Oh, Tom and I stood up proud. And we stood up proud, and Byrd goes, "Yes." He goes, "How do you know that?" She goes, "We learned about it in school yesterday. They taught us about it in school." And he goes, "It's law now, It's a law now that they have to teach about Constitution Day on that day or the day before." Byrd goes, "Yes, I know." He goes, "You know who wrote that law?" She goes, "No, who?" And Byrd goes, "I did." She goes, "No." Byrd goes, "Yes." She goes, "No, yes." I go, "No, yes." I did this 5 or 6 times. I don't know, I lost count. About the time he bring out the food, Tom and I grabbed the ice cream and grabbed the center and start rushing back. She looks at Brian Booth, our chauffeur. She asks Brian, who was he? Who is he? And Brian goes, he's a U.S. Senator. She goes, no, yes, no, yes. They start doing it. God, the whole thing was just crazy. We go in the back, we eat our butterscotch sundaes. And as we're sitting there eating, Byrd gave the woman and her associates copies of the Constitution. So as we're sitting there eating, they start running back here and asking Byrd for his autograph. And ask Byrd for his autograph, and he signs it, and he's glad to. And then as we're leaving, they all run up to him and want a picture taken with him. And God, it was a great picture. I've been in West Virginia, been $1 million, worth $1 million, because Byrd kneels down and he's standing around him in their Dairy Queen outfits. These 4 or 5 girls in their Dairy Queen outfits, really cute. And they take his picture, and they thank him and stuff. And as he's getting up, he looked at the woman, the girl that he had the exchange with over the counter, and he looks at her and points to his cheek. She goes, okay, and reaches up and kisses him on the cheek. And it's great. On the way to the car, we're teasing and saying, we should got a picture of that. Should got a picture of that to show Irma as his wife. She'd be glad to know her old man still has it. It was great. But it dawned on me, too, in 1 minute, these girls had no idea who the guy was. Next minute, they wanted his autograph, want a picture with him, stuff like that. So I ran back inside. It shows you kids today. Ran back inside and said, why was the difference? All of a sudden now you want his autograph, want pictures with him, you're kissing him. What's going on? They went back and Googled him. Somebody had a laptop in the back. They went back to Google Robert Byrd and saw a picture of him with some general. So there was a picture of him with some general, so we knew he was somebody important. Any other questions?
You're of the 11 presidents he worked for. Do you have information on what relationships he had with them and which ones he favored and did favor? What details can you give us about his experiences with the presidents he worked for?
Best details the book. I do it chapter by chapter with each administration. Best one. He always said Harry Truman, which I don't think you really I think you read David McCulloch's book on Truman administration, which is a whitewash of Truman. I think it's popular history. It's not good history. So I don't think he really ever, because he would hate Truman if Truman was president. Truman, abused Congress and drafted strikers and stuff like that. But probably one he worked most effectively with would be John Kennedy. It's interesting because he opposed Kennedy in the primary, in West Virginia primary. He opposed him and supported Lyndon Johnson. Kennedy becomes president. Kennedy made promises to help out West Virginia, and as soon as he becomes president, he's committed to really helping out West Virginia, really tries. He liked Lyndon Johnson. That's actually a very good question, because that was Byrd for you. He tried to like them all. He did not like Clinton from the start, because a week or two after Clinton's in office, Byrd goes down to the White House, tells Clinton to stop. Ward was getting back to us what Clinton was doing. Byrd goes down and telling him, stop it, you're not in Little Rock anymore. You're going to embarrass the White House. And sure enough, Clinton ends up embarrassing the White House. But for the most part, he really liked them all, tried to like them all, Republican or Democrat. And he's very close to Lyndon Johnson. When Lyndon Johnson becomes president, they have exchanged letters between Byrd and Johnson when he becomes president. Byrd promises to help because Johnson writes back, Burson couldn't have a better friend than you. Byrd's in his office one day, about 3 weeks after Johnson became president. Byrd's in his office working, and the phone rings. He picks up, Bob, it's Lyndon. He goes, what you doing? He goes, well, I'm here in my office, I'm working. Same as you, because those two workaholics. He goes, come on down, watch the ball game with me. So Byrd gets in his car and rides down to the White House, and they sit there and have a beer and watch a football game, Saturday afternoon football game. But then he started realizing Johnson lied to us about the war in Vietnam. And started realizing something's wrong in Vietnam. We've been lied to. He would turn on Johnson. And he would turn on Johnson. Then Nixon becomes president. He's friends with Richard Nixon, a conservative Republican. I like X. One's a liberal Democrat, and Byrd's friends with him, works with him until he goes against the Constitution. Byrd turns on him. Same thing with Richard Nixon. He's friends with Richard Nixon, helps out Nixon. Nixon considers Byrd, quote, the only Democratic friend in Congress, end of quote. He works with Nixon very close until he realizes Nixon's lying to us about Watergate, and he exposes the Watergate cover-up. I go into it in the book, but he tries to like them all. But Kennedy's interesting because there's such turnaround. In the West Virginia primary, Byrd and Kennedy really fought each other bitterly. It was a bitter fight. But then once Kennedy once Kennedy got the nomination, then Byrd really helped him out. He supported the national ticket. And he went down in Texas. Texans were furious with Johnson being on a ticket with a Catholic. And they're afraid they're going to lose Texas. Southern Baptists in Texas were furious. Johnson being on a ticket with a Catholic. Byrd's being a Southern Baptist. He gave 28 speeches in 27 days to Southern Baptists saying, because Kennedy's a good guy, he'll be great, stuff like that. So the state ended up going for Kennedy. And both Kennedy and LBJ would actually give Byrd a lot of credit for them carrying Texas in that election.
Is there a Robert Byrd in the Senate today?
Not even close. Not even close.
His speech, one of the last speeches he gave on, that I heard him give, kind of lambasted the coal industry. For kind of holding his state back is how I took it. Did you write that speech, or?
It was a Byrd speech.
And do you think he could be elected in this state with the climate we have now?
Byrd be elected anywhere. He was like that. When he ran for his first office in 1946, think about it, he owned a grocery store, but he had absolutely no political experience. He had no family connections. He had no money. He went to see local political leaders in Beckley. They wouldn't even give the guy an interview. But he still runs, and is the leading vote getter in this district. I talk about 3 unconventional political tools. The fiddle, he used the fiddle, the grocery store, and the church. And through those 3 things, that's what he would always use to get elected. Then this one of the great things, he developed his own constituency. His critics would, that's another myths and realities, his critics always maintained Byrd never faced a tough election. His whole life was tough. Given his whole background, the poverty the guy was raised in, he did not live in a house with running water or electricity till he's an adult. But he runs for office first time without money, no political connections, he still wins. Immediately he alienates both the 2 strongest political machines in the State House Gang, which is the political machine of the Democratic Party, the State House Gang, and the United Mine Workers. He alienates them. Before he can cast the first vote, George Taylor, President of District 29, comes to him and tells him who to vote for Speaker of the House. Byrd goes, no, I've already committed myself to the other person. Taylor goes, I'll make sure you never get elected again. Byrd goes, my word is my bond. I told him I was going to vote for him. Can't go against that. And Taylor committed himself to defeating Byrd. Byrd still wins. You were talking about the largest coal production state in the nation, District 29, and Byrd still wins. The UMW and the State House Gang would oppose Byrd all the way up until he gets to the U.S. Senate. In the U.S. Senate, he rises to the Senate leadership. Tough opponents. Don't tell me he never had a tough opponent. In 1967, he's elected Secretary of the Democratic Caucus. He defeats Ed Muskie of Maine, Phil Hart of Michigan, and the heavy favorite, Joe Clark of Pennsylvania. Joe Clark's a multimillionaire, liberal reformer, had the support of the New York Times, Washington Post, had the support of Lyndon Johnson. Byrd still wins Secretary of the Democratic Caucus. 1971, he runs against Ted Kennedy for whip. And when word got out that Byrd's considering running against Kennedy, absolutely nobody gave Byrd a chance to defeat Kennedy. And it's fascinating how Byrd does it. I'm not going to get into it here, but read the chapter, how he defeats Kennedy for whip. It's a fascinating chapter, how he does it. Then in 1977, he's elected Senate Majority Leader. Ted Kennedy, once Byrd defeats Ted Kennedy for whip, Kennedy is determined Byrd will not become Majority Leader. So Ted Kennedy works for 5 years to keep Byrd from becoming Senate Majority Leader. And he interviews a number of people. Kennedy doesn't want any part of Byrd again. Byrd's already humiliated him once. He doesn't want to go up against Byrd again. So he looks for somebody to run against Byrd. So Humphrey's been reelected to U.S. Senate after serving as vice president. So they go with the former vice president of the United States to run against Byrd for Senate Majority Leader. Byrd wins. He always had tough opponents. Byrd always won. He'd be like thing where he had appealed to both Democrats and Republicans, liberals, conservatives. But with some constituency, as I call it, a hillbilly constituency, the farmers and the coal miners from hills of Raleigh County and stuff, and he didn't need the political machines. That's why they hated him. They couldn't control him. Byrd was his own constituent, and he just rose in power without the political machines, and they could not control him.
I really appreciate, your lesson on this about the Ku Klux Klan, because I really wasn't aware of this. And this time period is especially interesting to me because I kind of see today being similar in our division and our rise of, controversy, very similar. I remember when they shared from history, when they shared the film Birth of the Nation, Wilson said, "So sad but true," and it kind of endorsed that this was true, Yeah. And is there any books that you're aware of that would help me learn more about this time period and the difference in the Klan? I would really like to read more.
Nothing's going to go into the Klan here. I do a chapter on Byrd, first chapter. I talk a little bit about this phenomenon. But nothing, always, Kenneth Jackson's book, The KKK in the City, he shows you it's a different, more complex organization. But I was going to, particularly that one, there was, fights between coal companies and the Klan. I was going to say, you may want to consider a new section for Mine Wars Museum. Everybody knows about the Mine Wars Museum. This is Wilma with Mine Wars Museum, Wilma Steele. And what is your official position? What is your official position?
I'm one of the founders and board members.
Big shot with the Mine Wars Museum. If you've been reading about it, they had a big event lately with John Sells. And go down and see the Mine Wars Museum. It's fascinating.
And May 1?
May 1. Yeah, it's a fascinating trip. They're closed for the season, unfortunately.
But we're always open for tourists. So you just get on the website and ask them, and they'll take you a tour. His name is Ken. The book that you were talking about.
Kenneth Jackson. Kenneth Jackson. Ku Klux Klan in the cities. Rather than just concentrate on the Klan of the South, which is the Klan he was describing, he concentrated on the Klan of the North. And it presents a different picture. So the questions, thanks for showing up. Thanks for the questions.
On the 16th of November, they're going to start the an exhibit here at the Cultural Center on the Robertson Byrd, Senator Byrd. That's something that when you come in, probably be on the mezzanine and be able to go through, and they'll have a lot of, probably some of the things from the archives and some of the things from the museum also. There's something coming up.
Eric will be here that night.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for coming.